Welcome to. Is my mic peaking, Nick? I don't know.
No, your mic's great. You should continue with the welcome.
Great? Okay.
You have a peaking mic.
Welcome to SCI Fridays. Have I got? Welcome. Let's try this again. Welcome to SCI Fridays, your portal into security, compliance, identity management, and you. I don't think that work. If you're new to the channel, we talk about all things that get us excited, scared, dismayed, but mostly excited about cloud security and governance. So pull up a chair, grab your wine, whiskey, or coffee, because we don't know when this is airing or where in the world you are when you are watching this. And, you know, if you're in an airport, time doesn't matter. We usually say that, right?
And welcome we are not back. Discriminatory.
Well, it's 10 p.m. somewhere, right? You
That's
walk
right.
into a business lounge, chances are you're going to have something to drink after like a 10-hour flight. But it's season 2, Nick. It is season 2. We've weathered the storms, and that's a segue to where Mark is right now. We've weathered the storms, and people have actually asked us to come back and give them some season 2-ness.
I'm reflecting on the season
where you
2-ness.
talk,
That's
Nick.
amazing. That's amazing. How you managed to work in a season 2-ness. I'm actually so excited about our guest, honestly, and I'd be delighted if I could do the intro. Is that all right?
He scares me, he used to. I think this is the first call, and I actually said to Mac, I said I have massive imposter syndrome when I'm on the call with him. And I was like, I don't, you know, it's like George W. and Dick Cheney, right? When Dick Cheney was drinking water, George W. wouldn't speak, right? And Nick will tell you the stories, right? I think I've overcome, I've moved past that.
Therapy is a wonderful
over
thing.
to you, Nick.
Today, we're actually delighted to have on the show Mark Simos, the security OG. So the little bit of hipsterness in there, and we had this huge debate about politically correct labels that we could staple onto you, Mark, because we wanted to call you the godfather of security. And then we thought, we're not sure. And eventually we, you know, for the sake of the political correctness police out there, we won't cycle through all the names, otherwise the show would never get aired. But thank you.
Look, I wanted to call him a demigod. Right? That was my official approach. Is the demigod of cyber, right? That's where I'm at, right? That's literally, release the Kraken and you see Mark come down with his MCRA stuff and like, the Bible and the Kraken just, turns into cement. That was my approach, but we can't use that now.
So we're going to be a lot more subtle in our introduction, Mark, and we'll just call you the OG.
That works.
He is the OG, right?
He is the OG. He's the OG.
He is the OG. It's taken us about 7 months of doing things with Mark to actually get over the fact that he is the OG, right? Where we can, not fanboy all the time. Literally, because
or maybe just off camera.
Off camera, yes. We still fanboyed the fact that he is season 2, episode 1. We have Mark on the show, and that's just this is like a diary of a CEO moment, right? where you have these greats on the show, and it's like, did we pinch yourself, and do we actually make it there? So Mark, the security OG, the guy that brought us the CISO workshop and the MCRA, right?
Yeah.
That all you, and you stick it next to an Oscar and it glows at the same frequency and it oscillates at the same frequency, because that's, how I remember when the MCRA dropped, our security guy, Matt, he stood next to it and it had this bold slide stuff and it was like,
the bold slide stuff.
That was that moment.
Amazing.
Oh, my word. It's just, wow. And it takes you like 3 weeks to understand what it is, because, it's there's a series called Foundation, right? I'm just going to stop talking now because I'll fanboy for the rest of the episode, and that's not why people are here. So, Nick, I'm going to let you do the talking.
Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So just for the folks who are watching, we know that Mark is in the midst of a hurricane bearing down on him, and still he's with us. So we thank Mark for his dedication and his a great sense of risk management. And so I just want to tangent off into that direction, because Mark, I think one of the most fun conversations I've ever had with you, and this is bringing out my inner risk nerd, has been every time we've spoken about something, even about that social media thing that we won't mention now, you have managed to weave risk into the conversation.
I guess I look at the world through the lens of risk, and hey, good stuff could happen, bad stuff could happen.
That's true. It's true. So do you want to tell us about yourself and a little bit of who you are, where you're from? We know that you're in Florida, but why IT, and why, more importantly, IT security?
It's a good question. I have to dial back a bit. I've been at Microsoft for 23 years. So the why IT question was, hey, I was good at computers. It seemed to be a decent way to make a living, right? Like that was just the thing, right? Like back in the late 90s, right? And the security thing, I've had sort of an on and off relationship over the years. Like I did some consulting for some government agent. I was Microsoft 23 years, and part of it I was in the consulting, Microsoft Consulting Services, it was called at the time. And I worked with a lot of different, government entities and agencies, and security and compliance especially are a big part of the culture there. And so, in order to get like a full what's called authority to operate for a particular organization I was working with, like we had to go through and basically go through every single security setting in Windows XP at the time, I think it was. And just grind through those things in a spreadsheet for like 2.5 days. So I've been acquainted with security for a long time. I even, early days, I supported Active Directory and certificate services and all those kind of things when I first started Microsoft. So I had sort of like a passing part of it, but then I was more of an infrastructure, SCCM type of person for a number of years, desktop deployment and what have you. And then it's around 2008, 9, 10-ish. I can't remember exactly when, is when I started doing cybersecurity full time. So I've always, been able to sort of connect that in with what I was doing, and then, I just decided to make it full time at some point.
Wow. It's not an uncommon story to hear people who've moved from something, and normally the infrastructure space, and then into the security space, and then move into that space full time. Why did you find yourself in security, or what is it about security that kept you there?
I think what I like about it is it's sort of an infinite challenge. Like the thing that jazzes me is I like to deal with complex, difficult problems, things that matter to people, things that have not yet been figured out. And it doesn't have to be like new territory. It could be just stuff that people struggled with and didn't get it right, or, made a few attempts and got 20% of the way there, but they didn't get it all the way. And so I just like taking those big complex problems and simplifying them, finding sort of the human sort of, clear, simple lens on it. Like that's the thing that I really enjoy is finding that simple truth at the heart of it, kind of crafting the model, as it were, and that represents the complexity, but does so in a simple way. And you can go deep or you can go shallow. And so, because like one of the biggest things about security that I love and hate, right? Because it's an opportunity that I love it, but it's also frustrating that we haven't gotten it right as an industry, is we have this massive disconnect between the business folks and the technical folks, and often the security folks. Like it's like this three-way, I'm thinking of the old cartoon that made fun of all the different org charts with the orgs, like, with the guns to each other, right? Like, and everybody's sort of like holding each other at arm's length, and nobody speaks the same language. They all have different cultural assumptions, about what good looks like. And, you got your risk thinkers in the business side. You've got your tech binary thinkers, and you've got your security paranoid thinkers. And I mean, these are loving terms, right? These aren't, insults. And like, but they can't communicate. And like, being able to bridge that and find these simple human ways of talking to each other and connecting that, and then bringing that down and mapping it into, okay, and here's the technology that makes that real. Like that's what gets me up in the morning. Like I love to solve those like human complex technology all jammed together kind of problems. That's fun for me.
I'd like to ask you one follow-up question before I hand over to Al. Something that you and I have spoken about in other calls is the problem about security and business buying into security. Do you mind unpacking that a little bit and why that's such a huge challenge?
Yeah, it's interesting because from a business standpoint, business leaders live in a world of uncertainty, right? They live in a world of this might not work. They sort of, I mean, all humans understand risk instinctively, but business leaders, they might not hit revenue targets, right? And something might go wrong. They're used to that, and they're familiar with that sort of fuzzy view of risk and bad things that could happen. Whereas the security and technical folks often grew up from a technical background, often a networking background. And in those worlds, it's not exactly binary, but it's very close to it, right? Where either the DNS lookup works or it doesn't, right? Or, all these things, it usually doesn't. But you have all these things that literally work, literally don't work. Sometimes things work and it's like, I don't know, but we'll keep going. That's more of an IT thing than a security thing. Security people would be paranoid about why it worked and they didn't understand. But there's these two very different worlds in the way that people look at it, and it's very much like a bottom up versus a top down view, right? Especially when you talk about business leaders, CEO, CFO, kind of the very top at the C-suite. And so being able to communicate in two different styles, two different cultural assumptions, two different languages, like I think there's just a whole lot of clashing there, because it's like, hey, I'm trying to tell you what's wrong. I just told you how many port scans we have. No, that's not what the level that the board operates at. The board is operating at, is this a material risk above X million or X, 20, 30, 50 million, in impact or more, depending on the company size, right? And so they're looking at it in a very different way, and they don't understand how to relate what they know about security as a human instinctively to what these technical people are telling them. So you end up just getting this clash at multiple levels, and it's not just like you fix one thing and you're done. It's culture, it's language, it's assumptions, it's scope, it's scale. It's a lot of things happening at the same time. So that's how I see that problem space. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
It is an interesting space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even in today's world, I mean, we do a lot of work with a lot of customers, and it's always the security people are in another building. Right. We want to deploy an Azure Migrate appliance, and we've got the CTO screaming at us because we're taking long, right? And then we go back to business, and the guy needs to get approval from the security people to deploy something, right? And it's always these camps. Business doesn't know. IT is a grudge purchase. It never does what it says on the box, and people can't send mails. And in the old days, we had this way of, you've got perimeter security, bricks and mortar. Moving to the cloud, that doesn't exist. Nobody can pull a network cable out of the back of the machine while they're being hacked, right? So today, where the world is from a business perspective, we are now saying to the C levels, you actually have to pay attention to what's going on inside of your organization. It's not just some guy that's going to pull a network cable out, right? And it's trying to bridge that gap where you're having non-technical conversations about technology with a non-technical person because it affects his business. And I remember the first time I saw it, and I will continually fanboy, the first time I saw the CISO workshops, the first batch of decks that came out, and I was so excited to present these things to customers because it was that first step into demystifying cybersecurity, right?
Yep.
Was that your approach when you put together the CISO workshop stuff?
Yeah, it was very much aimed at like, what are the challenges, because the CISO is still a new discipline now, but back in 2017, 2018, the first version, it was a very, very new discipline, right? Because we've had like 6-7 years or whatever to like mature our thinking on it since. And we've got a lot more experienced people and boards, and more people have been through breaches and ransomware. But yeah, we were definitely focused on what are the problems to solve there. And, there was just misperceptions galore. And the one that still persists today that you kind of reminded me of in your intro to the question is we have almost like an accountability paradox or an accountability problem where, the business decision makers are the ones that are saying, oh, we're going to do this, I'm going to override this and all this. And oh, by the way, if the risk goes wrong, it's on you, security. Right? And so you end up with this thing where it's like, you're putting me in a box. I feel like the little brother that gets blamed for everything the big brother does, right? Like no matter what I do, I'm in CYA mode all the time because if the big brother decides to do this, then I get punished for it, right? And the business folks, of course, are in more of a YOLO, like you only live once type of mode. And right, because it's like, oh, security isn't my problem, full speed ahead. Accountability, that's his problem. We'll fire him or her or whoever's in that seat. Right. And so we have this sort of paradox where the decision makers don't feel accountable for their actions, which is not a good situation. And of course, that means fixing at the business level, right? At CEO, at the board, at the accountability level. And those are the questions that, I'd ask a business leader is like, essentially, are your business people that are making these decisions accountable for them? Or are they just pinning the blame on that and essentially making a bad decision because you have 9 out of 10 factors when you're making those decisions. You don't have the 10th. You're outsourcing that. And, so that's one of the things that I find kind of warps the whole thing. Is one of it's a hard one to fix because you're talking literally go to the C-suite and say, you got to change your blame system, or I'm sorry, your accountability system. And that's a tough message, right? That all of a sudden these folks that, ran factories and business lines and all that, like all of a sudden you now have to learn something and be accountable for something you don't understand. And so there's a lot of transition that comes with that. And the CISO has to become an educator, enabler, et cetera. So anyway, there's my rant. Sorry.
No, it's weird, and I don't know if it's because of COVID or whatever the reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I actually wanted to ask you 5 years ago, what were your thoughts, and you explained it perfectly now around how do we talk to business about things that matter to them, right? Even though they don't understand, it's a dialect of English they don't quite understand. And it's the same with, GDPR said you need a data protection officer. And now everyone dealing with anyone from the European Union has to sit down with lawyers to make sure that you are referencing the right, controls inside of the regulation. It's not even legislation, it's a regulation. That's how serious people are, across the globe. Speaking to a customer partner early on, and their biggest thing was, how do I use a semantic engine to anonymize data when I want to look at things around license optimization, because people get fired, right? So it's a lot to do with the approach. And are we fighting a losing battle? How confident are we that and I suppose it's a demographic thing, right? The older generation struggle more with technology, present company excluded, because I'm old. And I'm a COBOL programmer. That's how dinosaur I am. My dad as well. You go do IT. It sounds interesting. Go become a programmer. And I, sort of fell into a vat of IT. And this is where I ended up today. But I do think that the shift where people start looking at technology more favorably is directly proportional to the age, right, of people. You're no longer having to read a 274-page white paper. Yeah. Yep. Although we're dealing with millennials and all the other gens that are coming through now, might be, we just expect the technology to work, right? And
why don't we ask
Skynet
Mark,
is your friend.
How does he deal? Because Mark, you do a lot
with
of
old people
leadership. No, not at all. So the thing is that, Mark has this thing about the dashboard of pain. He talks to IT folks, and all of a sudden everyone realizes that everyone's got a security problem, right? But then exactly that question, you've got demographics from current generation going back to people who've been running businesses for 40 years. How do you have a security conversation of relevance and do something about instrumenting the nature or the size of the problem across demographics?
It's a good question. I want to touch on one thing, because you mentioned a little bit earlier, Al, that you're talking about, keeping it positive and hopeful. I mean, to me, this is a problem that we're learning how to manage, right? We're just in the early, you can call it 10, 20 years. I guess sometimes it goes back 30, 40 years. Really depends on how you sort of mark the beginning of it. But we're new in this. You look at building materials, you look at road building, you look at railroads, centuries, sometimes millennia of experience and wisdom has gone into them. And we're talking a couple of decades, and it's barely been professionalized and regulated in the past 10 to 20. right? So we're still new at this, and we will figure it out. We'll figure it out fast. Because we have a lot to learn from in other domains of conflict. But I hold a lot of hope and optimism that this will become just like sort of regular crime, is that it will become a problem you can't get rid of, but manageable, right? Like it's going to be something that you're gonna be able to put in a box. You'll never be able to get rid of it, but it'll be manageable. So I have a lot of optimism for that.
Train robbers, right? Train robbers, regular crime, because we regard that as regular crime, right? Steam locomotives. I was chatting to Mac about this exact thing. And hopefully in 20, 30 years from now, we'll see, threat actors as regular crime. Right?
Yeah. I mean, there's some different physics for it. Like you can cross borders and there's safe haven countries. There's fundamental that we have to deal with. But we can. I think we can. I have a lot of hope we'll manage it. But to the demographic question, sorry, go ahead.
No.
Yeah. So to the demographic question, like one of the things I've learned, and one of the tricks I use to communicate between tech people and business people, which is find the human thread, right? So it's not about firewalls and perimeters and this, that, the other. It's not about, balance sheets and cost centers and all those kind of things. Like you can't go 100% local language to each of them in order to cross, different disciplines. And I think generations as well, you have to speak to the common human experience. You have to find the analogies of when we were talking about earlier, like the little brother, big brother thing, right? Everybody knows that. They've either gone through it or they've seen a friend go through the big brother, little brother problem, right? Like you have to find those sort of common human behaviors that are at the core that get projected and represented into the different generations. Some are more risk averse, some are technology averse, some are, love technology and just assume it works, some don't. Right. I mean, I was reading an article the other day that like people miss being able to slam down a phone because you can't slam a cell phone, right? Or you break your phone, right? But like, you got to find those like common human experiences that are universal, regardless of how old you are, and really talk to that. And you do that, and all of a sudden everybody realizes, oh, I get this, right? And they sort of strip away a lot of their local knowledge, and it's like, oh, this is just a human thing. Right. And that's all cybersecurity is some people doing crime, some people doing espionage and spying. That's all it is. And, extortion has resurrected itself as a mainstream crime because of the internet. So.
We're not stealing gold off stagecoaches, right? We're no longer doing that. We're getting in other ways.
There's an old quote. I think it was misattributed to like Jesse James or whatever, but it's like, why do you rob banks? It's where the money is. That's all there is to it. It's that simple.
I want to append myself to the end of that question. So not where the money is, but tell us, what is Mark excited about? What gets your gears going and what gets you out of bed?
Like I said earlier, it's those complex problems like that really kind of, gets me up that like, one, it's just solving them and figuring it out because there's sort of like a quiet time in the studio collaborating with, coworkers and colleagues kind of thing. But then there's the spark that you see when you're, presenting it, explaining it, seeing people react to it, where it's like, oh, I get it. Now I can do something better. Like that's really kind of what gets me excited. Like people coming together, people working together. When you say, hey, you need to work with such and such, and then, you come back and hear like 6 months later that, hey, we did this and it worked better. Like that's, helping people, seeing that kind of impact. That's really what gets me going.
I suppose we're almost at the top of the half hour, Nick. So what's hot, what's not hot? What are you most excited about outside of Security Copilot? Because we've all been told we have to be excited about Security Copilot. What matters to you today?
Yeah, so a couple things going on. I am working on the next version of MCRA. I've had numerous people remind me that they need a new one. So one of the dark sides of having expanded it to Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architectures, plural, is that there's more diagrams to update and more slide notes to update, more text to update. So it's going a little bit slower than I want, but like the main one is getting close to ready. So I might sneak some previews out there or something like that. But, making some good progress on that. And then a couple other things like the fact that Zero Trust is getting standardized, right? And so I'm a Zero Trust Architecture forum co-chair at the Open Group. And so the Zero Trust commandments have come out. The reference model is soon to come out. And so we got the rules of the road, and pretty soon we'll have all the components and pieces. And so, lots and lots of good stuff coming from there that actually help kind of connect the dots. And so having that and being able to map in technologies, process, products to those ongoing durable capabilities. So I'm very, very excited about that. And I do have another unannounced project that will be building on that even further. So stay tuned for that in the next month or two, I hope. So yeah, lots and lots of stuff going about like sort of getting those baseline foundation pieces in place that, we can build on and other people can build on and connect to and say, hey, this is how we make this standard real. This is how we, we built the process around this. This is the technology we built and how it relates to it. So very, very excited to sort of, be able to do that and have this end-to-end view of security and all the things you need. And then you can start, and then we can build on that. Again, it's foundational stuff, but it's one of the foundation's missing. The house is lopsided. So,
Nick, is that a wrap? Have we exhausted enough?
It's
of
nearly
Mark's time.
So we just want
Nearly
to
a
plug Mark's list. Mark has his own aka.ms, which is amazing. We have to celebrate that. So Mark, just very quickly before we wrap, tell us about this list and what do people find in it?
Absolutely. So that's got pretty much the links that I'm always sending people. So I don't know, 70, 80% are mine. Some of them are like NIST, incident recovery, cybersecurity framework, et cetera. Like the resources that I'm often pointing people to that they may or may not be aware of that will be useful for a particular problem that we see come up. So that's sort of my, instead of having to type up an email every time, I now just send people Mark's list because it's easier that way. And so it's sort of grown to about, 50 or so links, I'd say, kind of broken into categories. So definitely some good stuff to go there, including some stuff for people new to cyber, experienced folks, like lots of different resources. So, yeah.
And with that, Al, I'm done. We can land the show.
Mark, I'd spend the next 3 days. I'd jump on a plane and fly out to Florida and spend some time with you just to
Not a good time right now. Hurricane.
Look, Florida is the only place that I've ever been to that has, post boards next to a landmass of water that says, beware of crocodiles and alligators, right? At the Orange County Convention Center. It's the craziest thing. So, Mark, thanks so much for joining us today. It's an honor and a privilege to have you as a guest on the show. And if you want to get hold of Mark, find him on LinkedIn, aka/MS Mark's List. And if you want to follow us, head over to our LinkedIn page. We have an official LinkedIn page, linkedin.com/company/SCI-Fridays. That's probably the easiest way to stay up to date with us. As always, this episode will be published on a Friday. This Friday, Nick?
That's correct.
This Friday, usually between 12 and 2 during the day, but we do not archive to YouTube. So if you've missed this live broadcast, you can grab the recording. It will be up on our YouTube channel. For those that prefer YouTube, you can also hit the subscribe button and the notification bell if you want to be notified. Otherwise, just stick to LinkedIn because it's the easiest. And I'm going to commit on behalf of Nick and myself that you should be expecting a new episode of SCI Fridays for at least the following 13 Fridays.
Oh, glory.
Comment, Nick? No pressure. It's been a blast.
I'm
on
there.
That bombshell, are you there? I'm there. It's been a blast. And on that bombshell, I'm Alistair Pugin. And
I'm Nicholas Blank.
Yes. And we'll catch you on the next episode of SCI Fridays. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye.